Welcome, everyone, and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants will be on listen only until the question and answer session of today's conference, at which time you may press star 1 to ask a question. Today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, please disconnect at this time. I'd now like to turn the meeting over to your host, Michael Waters. Sir, you may begin.
Thanks, Amber. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first of 2 Discover Global Markets Sub-Saharan Africa Conference preview webinars. My name is Mike Waters, and I'm an international trade specialist with the U.S. Commercial Service based out of the Atlanta U.S. Export Assistance Center. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us for a brief market overview highlighting top prospects for U.S. exports in 2 of the fastest-growing economies on the planet, Nigeria and Ghana. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the U.S. Commercial Service, we are the export promotion arm of the Department of Commerce International Trade Administration. Our organization assists U.S.-based companies export their goods and services using a network of experienced trade professionals with offices throughout the United States and in more than 70 countries around the world. If you haven't already, be sure and connect with your local U.S. Export Assistance Center in your area to tap into this valuable resource. Visit our webpage at www.export.gov and click the Locations tab to find the closest office near you. We are joined today by 3 of our most senior commercial officers on the continent of Africa. Don Ney is the Regional Senior Commercial Officer based out of Johannesburg, South Africa, and will be giving us an overview of the African continent as a whole, as well as highlighting the available resources through the U.S. Commercial Service on the ground today. Don will be followed by Brian McCleary, our Senior Commercial Officer in Lagos, Nigeria. Brian will provide us with an overview of the Nigerian market, highlighting some of the top prospects for American exports. Following Brian will be our Senior Commercial Officer out of Accra, Ghana, Paul Taylor. Paul will be covering the Ghanaian market, also highlighting top sectors for U.S. export, as well as some recent infrastructure projects taking place on the ground. We will close the webinar with a brief overview of the upcoming Discover Global Markets Sub-Saharan Africa Conference here in Atlanta, Georgia, November 5th and 6th, and should have time for a brief question and answer session. With that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Don Ney. Don, take it away.
Hey, Mike, thanks, and welcome, everybody. Let me as this slide comes up, you'll look at some of these numbers here, but let me just kind of give you a little context. I'm sitting here in South Africa, Pretoria at the moment, and I had the great honor to serve in South Africa from 1995 until the end of 98, during right after the apartheid transition. And at the time, we were based in Johannesburg. We were very excited as the U.S. Commercial Service, U.S. Department of Commerce, to be working with the new South African government as they were opening up to the world, into the world economy after years of sanctions. And it was a very exciting time to be here. We had multiple trade missions coming from our former Secretary, Ron Brown, who tragically died in a plane crash in those days. And there was great interest with President Clinton coming down and actually dedicating our building in 1998 to Ron Brown. We, under the Clinton administration, we had high hopes that Africa was on the map, on the commercial map, on the trade map, and we had plans at that time to actually expand and open up a little bit in Africa from the post that we had. That never materialized. I went off to Asia, to India and Asia, and had a chance over the next 15 or 20 years or so to really see what was happening in Asia. And as we all know, Asia is booming. And then I had the opportunity to come back to South Africa, and I returned in June of this year. And I had about a year to look into what was going on in Africa before I came back. And I have to say I was skeptical, having seen what was going on in Asia, but I started talking to some of the serious players. You know their names, some of the major companies and so forth, and they were explaining to me why Africa really is a solid mid to long-term market for them and why they need to be here. And I think many of the same reasons why they have decided to come here and expand here, you'll see here in the first slide. You see the actual demographics, the numbers there going up to 1.5 billion. It has the fastest growth rates, population growth rates in the world. You see the significant GDP as it stands. And of course, the one of the most important numbers is this 4.2% GDP annual growth over the next few years. This actually is probably a bit higher in many respects. U.S. $450 billion of merchandise imports into the continent, the direct flights that are taking place now, and so forth. So, Mike, if you want to give me the next slide, please. And so what has happened is a couple years ago, President Obama and the Department of Commerce, we launched this Doing Business in Africa initiative. And I'm not going to get into too many of the details as far as this goes, but it was actually launched here in Johannesburg a couple years ago. And the event, by the way, that we're going to be talking about at the end of this program in Atlanta is the second anniversary event of the launch of the Doing Business in Africa campaign. But in a nutshell, it's a interagency, inter-U.S. government agency initiative to connect American businesses with Africa partners, to support existing and new American investment in Africa, expand access for American businesses and to finance their exports to Africa, and reduce barriers to trade and investment in Africa. Next slide, Dan. Now, what is happening is that this thing has really taken off, and as many of you would be aware, there was a unprecedented gathering of the Africa Leaders Summit in Washington just in August, beginning of August. And we had over 40 African heads of state that came in, but not only did they come by themselves, they came with their key ministers and so forth, but they also brought with them many influential, successful African businesses looking to partner with the American companies. And we had, of course, on our side, many American companies that have had significant success and experience in Africa, along with many companies that had an interest in finding out what opportunities may be in Africa for them. At the summit, from the summit, the president announced $7 billion in new financing, $12 billion for Power Africa, which is one of the key hallmark programs of the Doing Business in Africa, and $14 billion in U.S. private sector deals. And of course, these exports support tens of thousands of U.S. jobs as well as African jobs. Okay, Mike? Now, just so you know what we look like on the ground, one of the, what we call deliverables, one of the results of this initiative is that we are doubling our footprint. That's us, the U.S. Commercial Service, is doubling our footprint in Sub-Saharan Africa. We've had our offices in South Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, and Kenya for many years now, but we've just opened up our office in Ethiopia and in Tanzania. We're opening up also in Mozambique and Angola. So we've basically just doubled our footprint in Africa. And this is where we have commercial service officers on the ground with local nationals ready to assist you. In addition to that, we are the one center in the world here in South Africa where we're coordinating what we call partnership posts with our U.S. State Department colleagues, the U.S. ambassadors and economic officers in 25 Sub-Saharan Africa posts. We have direct relationships with them. We work with them on companies looking to come into those markets. We try to support our State Department colleagues in providing the kinds of services and information and counseling that you would get if you came to one of our countries. So that's our footprint. Our goal is to really be a bigger player in this market. There's tremendous opportunities, significant challenges, and I'm delighted right now to be able to introduce you to Brian McCleary, one of our most senior Foreign Service officers and our senior commercial officer in Nigeria, to let you know about the Nigerian market.
Yes, thank you, Don. It's a pleasure to join this webinar. I have been in Nigeria for about 10 months and see some daunting challenges, but untold opportunities in a wide range of sectors. I'm very bullish, and my colleagues and I, with the ambassador here and the Consul General and I, are very we are very bullish about the long-term business opportunities here. But Nigeria's economy is now the largest in Sub-Saharan Africa, based on recent World Bank numbers. And it is not the most too sophisticated country necessarily, but it is now the largest economy in Sub-Saharan Africa, with the largest population as well, more than 170 million. And is probably a lot higher than that. The census has not captured all population centers. Lagos, where we are based, is more than 20 million alone. So you can imagine it is a potential or an actual engine of economic growth in Africa. So it's the largest nation and the largest consumer base potentially. These are consumers of American products and services. The elections that were held in 2011 were transparent and they were credible. And we are hoping that next February in 2015 there will be a repeat of that, and a political stability and continuity, of course. The government of Nigeria is committed to a free market, basically, and to economic growth and monetary stability, because it's been espousing the right policies. Their actual implementation at times is uneven, but their policies are fairly liberal. There have been reforms in key industrial sectors. The notable one is power generation, where distribution and generation companies have been privatized, thereby creating a lot of business opportunities for American companies. The leading sectors in terms of U.S. exports and investment are energy, infrastructure, health, and transportation. Let me say a few things about those. Next page, please. We talked about the elections next year. There are serious political challenges here. And because of the elections, many public procurements, or government sector ones, have been on hold. Notwithstanding, we are engaging in the ministries and the private sector in a wide range of sectors. Its commercial law institutions are fledgling still. There's a lot of bureaucracy. This is why the commercial service is here, in order to help you. There are also the critical power generation and infrastructure shortages. These challenges are what create a lot of possibilities for American business. If I can turn to the next slide, please. In terms of best prospect sectors, we've listed the four principal ones, but they are not exclusive. In energy, oil and gas has great potential in terms of upstream machinery and services, modular refineries, and oil distribution equipment. And a natural gas market development is a national priority right now, which creates a lot of opportunities as well. In terms of power generation, Nigeria currently has a very limited capacity. It's only 3,500, and South Africa is between 35,000 and 40,000. The U.S. is more than 700,000. Its national plan calls for 40,000 megawatts of electricity by 2020 and 20,000 by 2016. So this creates a lot of potential for American technology and solutions. In terms of infrastructure, there's a lot of potential in the realm of architecture, construction, and engineering for roads, bridges, housing, schools, and hospitals. And then there's a lot of room for growth in the information and communications technology sector, which is empowering and which is a transforming of the way Nigerians do business. If we turn to the next slide, please. In the health sector, there are many business opportunities in hospital administration, in healthcare and medical devices. And then pharmaceuticals is another area with significant potential. The next sector is transportation. Nigeria is acquiring many aircraft, and the automotive sector is of high interest. It seeks to develop a manufacturing capability, but because of the large population, there's heavy demand for vehicles of every kind. And then because Nigeria's extensive coastline, there is heavy demand for your marine vessels. Let me say that there is huge potential in a wide range of sectors, not just these four. You have other areas such as safety and security, defense, education and training, finance and franchising. I would be remiss if I didn't mention those. And the power generation, by the way, was the theme of the Commerce Secretary's trade mission to Nigeria and Ghana last May, and Paul will talk about that as well. She came with a delegation of 70. She was deployed by the President, which was telling, and we are now in the process of building upon the success of her trade mission and the success of the Africa Summit that Don was talking about. Let me stop there, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Brian. Let me go ahead and introduce Paul. Paul, again, is one of our most experienced officers, and Paul shares, even more so than me, the vision of what was going on in Asia. And Paul spent many years in China, and so he has that to compare the kind of action that's taking place in his neck of the woods. Paul?
Thanks, Don. Again, my name is Paul Taylor. I'm the Senior Commercial Officer at the U.S. Embassy here in Accra. I should stress the pronunciation of Accra. I think it was mispronounced. No criticism. I was mispronouncing it prior to my arrival, but Accra, Ghana, capital of Ghana and home to about a tenth of the total population of the country. Ghana has got an incredible amount of stuff going for it. It's a really good news story on a continent that has had a lot of bad news coming out over the last several decades. You'll note that my slide is titled The Good News, because there is really just some fantastic stories to tell about what has been happening in Ghana since it became independent. In 1957, actually, Ghana was the first Sub-Saharan African country to become fully independent from its previous colonial power. Ghana became independent under the first president in late 1957. Formerly known as the Gold Coast, it has been Ghana since 1957 and has been a great success story for Africa. You'll note that the numbers are considerably smaller than what Brian has just discussed. Ghana has a relatively small population, 26 million people. Its GDP is roughly around a tenth of its neighbor Nigeria. But it punches above its weight. Ghana has things going for it that aren't always reflected in pure economic numbers. The economic numbers, though, by themselves do tell a really good and solid story. GDP growth rate 5% this year. That is actually down considerably. Ghana was the fastest growing economy in the world in 2007, growing at, I think it was 15-16%. Just crazy growth that fortunately sort of smoothed out. We've dropped down to 5%, but still solid growth, very, very sustainable over the near to long term. Ghana's growth and Ghana's economy is really driven by several pillar sectors. agriculture does play a very important part in Ghana's economy. Ghana, a lot of people may not know this, but most of the chocolate that you consume has its start here in Ghana. Ghana is one of, if not the leading exporter of cocoa, and supplies Hershey's and many of the Swiss European chocolate manufacturers. Ghana is also its previous name under English colonialism was the Gold Coast for good reason. It's also one of the largest producers of gold, particularly for a country of its size. Ghana produces a very, very significant amount of gold. Industry, manufacturing, and services also make up a very important part of the economy here. I mentioned that Ghana punches above its weight, and really the reason for that is because on a continent with governments that are notoriously unstable, that are incredibly opaque, and where corruption is the norm, Ghana stands by itself. It's a safe, it's a stable economy. It has demonstrated that it can hand over power from one political party to the next without mobs on the street. And it's just been a model for what the U.S. government and much of the world really wants to see here on the continent. It also has very strong ties with the U.S., despite being and maintaining really strong ties with the U.K. based on its former colonial relationship. There are really strong and deep ties between Ghana and the United States. Ghana has a very large diaspora community, and much of those people are in Houston, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, and a few other parts of the U.S. I would be remiss if you could switch this to the next slide. I'm sorry, the embassy's having one of its sort of warning messages. That'll be over in a second. So the news isn't all good coming out of Ghana, unfortunately. Ghana is undergoing, similar to what Brian just discussed in Nigeria, Ghana is undergoing a protracted fiscal crisis and is trying to work its way out of years of overspending. If you've been reading the news, you likely have seen Ghana in the press as they're getting closer to working out a deal with the IMF. The IMF is going to be coming in the next several months and helping to sort of restructure some of their debt and refocus the direction of their economy. Ghana's gone from 15% growth in 2007 to this year having the worst performing currency in the world. The CD has lost more than 50% of its value since I arrived here at Post a bit over a year ago. And that really you can't help but point the blame at the senior leadership, at the president and other members of his cabinet. They've been indecisive and they've demonstrated poor leadership and an inability to make really tough, critical decisions that need to be made as they're going through some real economic stress. Some of the stress is I'll talk about this a little bit more, but Ghana, one of the reasons Ghana's economy grew so quickly in 2007 was oil was discovered offshore in the mid-2000s and came online in about 2007. The government started spending like drunken pirates and got itself into a hole fairly quickly. That honeymoon period lasted 3 or 4 years, but by late 2012, early 2013, they began to see what they had done, and now they're beginning to try to work themselves out of it. Despite Ghana's really great outlook and fantastic government to work with, they have the same infrastructure challenges that the rest of Sub-Saharan Africa has. Roads that are in dire need of rehabilitation, bridges that are decades out of date, ports that are underdeveloped, and just a whole host of infrastructure challenges. You'll note at the bottom of this slide, I indicate that there's part of the bad news is there's a presidential election in 2016. That doesn't seem to have a lot of logic, but unfortunately, as I mentioned, the leadership has demonstrated their inability to make really tough decisions. That's only going to be exacerbated by the fact that the current administration, the current party, needs to be reelected in 2016 and is not going to be able to make the same decision, not going to have to make the difficult decisions that need to be made. It's just really only going to get worse between now and 2016. The IMF is going to be helping things move along, but it's going to be a little tough. The next slide, please. So I wanted to highlight, I think I have three really priority sectors or the most promising opportunities. Energy remains the greatest opportunity for U.S. companies in Ghana, and that's I've done energy sort of writ large, including both offshore oil and gas and the power sector. Brian mentioned that Secretary Pritzker led a trade mission to Ghana and Nigeria earlier this year. It was focused on energy for very logical reasons. Ghana has an emerging sector, oil and gas sector. Nigeria has a maturing sector, and both of these markets have fantastic opportunities for U.S. companies. The same story, though, unfortunately applies to their oil and gas developments. They have not been able to make the tough decisions that need to be made, and their infrastructure reflects that. Their offshore oil production is not huge, certainly by Nigerian standards. I believe they're pumping about 100,000 barrels a day. They have natural gas associated with the offshore fields, but because of infrastructure challenges, they've been unable to bring that gas onshore, and they're now flaring the gas. This is being done while like much of Africa, Ghana is in this terrible power deficit. The lights at my house go off every night. I was out traveling yesterday, staying at a really nice 4-star, 5-star hotel in Takarai, the best hotel in the city, and the lights were out for a good share of the time that I was staying there. These are enormous challenges for Ghana, but like all challenges, there are enormous opportunities embedded in these challenges, and there's opportunities for U.S. companies that can provide the right solution, the right technology, the right financing, which is critically important, and do it on sort of Ghana's terms, which means looking at the long term, finding local partners that are going to be able to help you and really stay focused on this market for the mid to long term. There's two others, and I'll breeze over these fairly quickly. Infrastructure, I already mentioned that. Just ridiculous number of opportunities for infrastructure if the money can be found. I mentioned BOT, Build, Operate, Transfer projects, or PPP, Public-Private Partnership. These are models that Ghana is attempting to use to try to get out from under the burden of financing these projects themselves. There may or may not be opportunities, but it's certainly something to keep an eye on. And lastly, I wanted to highlight healthcare. Ghana suffers from many of the same diseases that are endemic to all of Western Africa, if not all of Africa. We'd probably be remiss if we didn't mention Ebola on this call. It's a fact of life. Fortunately, Ghana has not had a single incident of Ebola, but it's really representative of the challenges that all of these countries face without the infrastructure and the money in place to fix those problems. Lots of opportunities in the healthcare. They're really going to be at the lower end of the sort of value chain. The companies that come to Ghana, and particularly in the healthcare sector, need to be looking at really sort of cost-effective, cost-appropriate solutions to Ghana's healthcare challenges. Next slide. So this is my last slide. I wanted to highlight a couple recent infrastructure projects here in Ghana, and I won't belabor these, but all of them have very interesting stories. Don mentioned that I spent a lot of time in China. You can't talk about Africa without talking about China. I'm looking at least 2, if not 3 of these projects have significant China participation. The gas processing plant is being built by Sinopec, one of the state-owned companies in China. The China Development Bank is listed there as CDB. China Development Bank has floated a $3 billion fund for infrastructure development in Ghana. Most of that's going to go to Chinese companies. There is, with really savvy handling, I would think that there are opportunities for U.S. companies coming out of these China-financed projects. It's very tricky, but there's a possibility of doing that. Ghana 1000 is a project being proposed by GE. 1,000 megawatts is what the 1000's for, which would be about 20% of the total that Ghana expects to need in the next 5 years or so. The problem is, as I indicate in that question, there's no gas available right now, and the gas is sitting offshore. The Chinese haven't been able to finish their processing plant. the West Africa gas pipeline that theoretically should be bringing Nigerian gas to Ghana isn't doing it. So meanwhile, we sit here with the lights out and not the fuel that we need to produce the power. The last two are port expansion projects, probably competing on some level. The Chinese are involved in both of them, and there are, I should mention though, U.S. Participation currently in at least one of those projects, but a lot of sort of political maneuvering behind these projects. A lot of details to go into, way too many opportunities to cover in 8 minutes. I've probably already gone over, but happy to answer questions, and certainly encourage companies that are looking at Africa to consider Ghana as a potential first step. It's a relatively easy place to get started on the continent, and a good place to grow your business here. Thanks.
Okay, Mike. Thanks, Paul. Mike, do you want me to give it a little pitch on the event?
That would be great. Thanks, Don.
Sure. Okay. Well, look, I think the purpose of this call is to give everybody a taste of what's available to you who are looking at the opportunities and potential business in Africa. And we will be coming to a city near you soon, and that is Atlanta, November 5th and 6th. We expect about 300 people or more to come to the event over this 2-day period. And one of the value adds that we're going to be providing at this event on Sub-Saharan Africa is Paul, Brian, me, my deputy Brent Omdahl. 2 of us are coming from South Africa, plus our counterparts in the other 5 markets on the continent will be coming, plus some of our State Department colleagues from some other markets will be coming, and we will all be available to meet with companies one-on-one that have interests in our countries. We will be happy to sit down with you and counsel you and maybe provide some guidance and some suggestions on next steps on how to take the business further. It's not only going to be us, Mike. We have who else is going to be available for the one-on-ones?
We've also got folks from Export-Import Bank of the U.S., Small Business Administration, U.S. Trade Development, and the Overseas Private Investment Corporation.
Right. Okay. So all of these folks will be there available. You sign up now. You can start signing up for the countries and the subject matters that you're interested in. The website is up and running. The registration is up and running. I think they've got the latest agenda, which is going to continue to evolve until game day. But we hope to have our boss, the Secretary of Commerce, as our keynote speaker on the first day. We have some high-level State Department people that are coming, and just a whole variety of both public and private sector experts on different matters in Africa and in the trade and investment area. So, it's your way to connect with us physically over a 2-day period and maybe start the process. And certainly we will continue to be on the ground on this end when you want to follow up with your individual business interests. Mike, anything you want to add?
I think that sounds great. Operator, could we open it up for questions?
Yes, we'll now begin the question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question, please press *1. You'll be prompted to record your name. Please be sure to unmute your phone. Once again, if you would like to ask a question, please press *1. If at any time you'd like to withdraw your question, please press *2. And we'll pause for just a moment to allow those questions to start coming through. Our first question comes from Hogan. Your line is open.
Hello. Hi, guys. Thank you so much for the presentation. This is really great information to kind of get a sense of what it would be like doing business in Africa. So I had a question. I think most of the stuff there covered the private sector. One of the things my business is doing is targeting the government as a as a potential customer. We're in the healthcare industry. Medical devices is for mosquito and bacterial-borne disease prevention. And I was wondering if the commercial services can help us with contacts within the government to potentially get procurement opportunities. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Paul, do you want to take that one because you had healthcare up there, and then Brian might have a comment, and I may have a comment as well.
Sure. So Ghana's healthcare sector is primarily state-driven. There's a national health insurance program that covers most Ghanaians at a fairly basic level. So as I mentioned in my presentation, the best opportunities in the health sector are at a relatively sort of low level. But that would the solutions that target the critical challenges that Ghana has, and malaria, you mentioned, is certainly one of them, would have would see the greatest traction here, probably. To quickly answer your question, absolutely. I mean, that's kind of part of our bread and butter is connecting U.S. companies with the most appropriate partners here in our markets, and those partners might be private sector distributors. It might be an agent that represents your brand or your products here, but it also, in many cases, it's going to be the host government. It's going to be the right contacts in the Ministry of Health that are making procurement decisions and would be the right ones for you to talk to. So, yes, we can put you in touch with the right people. I think either Don or Mike probably could talk about, if we need to talk about some of the services that we provide. Many of our services are just exactly that, focused on getting you in front of the right potential partner and possibly customer also.
Thank you.
Yeah. Brian, did you have any thoughts on Nigeria and the health sector?
Yes, if I may add, there is huge potential here, and we'd be very happy to put you in contact with the right people in the public or private sector. The ministry is in Abuja. We are in the commercial center. We are in Lagos. But we work very closely with our colleagues in Abuja. Malaria is an endemic problem here. In fact, those of us assigned to Nigeria consume anti-malarial medication on a daily basis. So you please contact us, and we'd be very happy to explore the possibilities for you.
Yeah, and that, again, that goes across the board for our countries in Africa. We should mention that the U.S. government has significant operations and investment in terms of resources and personnel in the healthcare system in Africa. Through the President's emergency plan to fight AIDS, the PEPFAR program, there's literally billions of dollars that have gone in to Africa over the past decade or so. We have significant U.S. government health presence in the form of USAID and the Centers for Disease Control. And so we usually, in many of these countries, we have exceptionally good relations with the health, the government health ministries, and so forth. So that said, government procurements can be a very tricky business, are a very tricky business on the continent, and certainly we would be happy to work with you on sorting that out.
Great, thank you.
Our next question comes from Brian Harvey. Your line is open.
Yes, hi. My question is similar to the one before. We're an ag forest products company, and we produce wooden utility poles, lumber, and OSB plywood. And we're interested in getting hooked up with partners that would be in power distribution, construction-related fields or housing. And my second part of the question is, we've done the general registrations for the meeting, and I know you have the breakout sessions scheduled. Within the breakout session, is there an opportunity to do one-on-one meetings, and how would those be scheduled?
Yeah, Mike, you want to go ahead and address that?
Sure, yeah. That's exactly what the breakout sessions are for. During the breakout sessions, we'll have time to meet one-on-one with the senior commercial officers that are available. And once you get registered, we'll be sending the links and the scheduling system to get all that squared away. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those offline for you.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Great.
Mike, could I comment? This is Paul. Could I make one quick comment?
Sure, of course.
I'll very much look forward to connecting with you, with the gentleman that just asked that question, in Atlanta. There are significant opportunities here in Ghana for just exactly what you mentioned. We've mentioned Power Africa. There's, I believe, 6 markets in Sub-Saharan Africa that have been identified by the U.S. government for Power Africa support. Ghana also has another program run by the Millennium Challenge Corporation, MCC, that is just starting up. It was signed at the Africa Leaders Summit. An agreement between Ghana and the U.S. was signed at the Africa Leaders Summit. And so it's a $500 million program. It's real money coming into Ghana. And it's focused almost exclusively on power generation and power distribution. I should say mostly on power distribution, a little bit on generation. There'll be significant procurement opportunities in Ghana over the next, this is a 5-year program, so over the next 5 years there will be real opportunities for the procurement of U.S. products and probably services that go into the power distribution sector and some into generation. I'm hoping that MCC will actually have a representative at Atlanta, and I'm not sure if Mike or Don would know if that's true or not, but there may be an opportunity to also have a conversation with MCC staff officials in Atlanta while you're there.
Oh, excellent. Okay, thank you.
Sure. Good suggestion, Paul. Mike, we need to follow up on that, and it would be good if we could certainly get them engaged at the show.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good.
And if I may add, in Nigeria, where it's the same, it's the potential in the sphere of power generation and construction, where the only way is up. Thank you.
All right, very good. Thank you, gentlemen.
The next question comes from Amir Qureshi. Your line is open.
I'm with Venture Aviation close by to Atlanta Hartsfield Airport, and we're an aviation services company. We provide aircraft spare parts, both commercial and military, as well as we do repair and overhaul management for commercial aviation and military aviation parts. I've had the opportunity to be associated with Africa for many, many years. I have a question for Brian as well as for Paul. For Paul, going back in the late 90s, President Clinton had initiated an Africa Safe Skies policy initiative in which I had participated in one of the main U.S. delegation that was invited in Accra. And I just wanted to know, is that Safe Skies initiative, has it ever been further promoted by the current administration, the Obama administration? That's one question. The reason I'm asking is that because aviation in Africa and the continued worthiness of commercial aviation is very, very vital for the safety of the traveling masses. And we as a company, service provider company, we support many airlines around the world with aircraft spare parts. So I just wanted to know if there's any such kind of initiative program that's coming up or still going on. That's a question for Paul. And for Brian, I have another question for you. Is one of the gentlemen in this seminar and webinar had asked you if you can assist with the government contacts there in promoting the U.S. products. We are trying to actually penetrate the African market, especially with emphasis in Nigeria and Ethiopia as well as Ghana, to support some of the aircraft that we have capabilities on. And I just wanted to ask you if there was any opportunity for companies like us to present our bids in a fair and transparent way and be given an equal opportunity to compete, because we're competing head-on with a lot of European suppliers.
Right.
This is Paul. I guess I'll answer your first question first. Interesting timing because the program, the Safe Skies program that you mentioned, I discussed that today with a Department of Transportation official that was traveling through Ghana. It is still active. It is getting more attention, I believe, now from the Obama administration as really a part of our renewed and intensified focus on what's happening here in Sub-Saharan Africa. There is works in process to make the Safe Skies program more high profile. It probably, I don't have a lot of background on the program itself, to be honest, but it appears that it was sort of on the back burner for a little while, but it's being re-intensified as the notion that there'll be certainly a lot more flights between Sub-Saharan Africa and the U.S. as our commercial engagement gets tighter. Ghana is not a great candidate, though, because if my understanding is right, Safe Skies is focused on state carriers, and Ghana does not have a carrier at the moment. They've had several iterations of a Ghana Airways state-owned airline. Both of them have gone bankrupt over the last 10 years. The Safe Skies program is certainly focused on Nigeria and a few other markets, though, in West Africa and around the continent.
Thank you.
This is Brian. If I may add, it remains a priority in Nigeria. Several directors general of aviation, of civil aviation, were fired a couple of months ago within the Nigerian government, that is, and there's been turnover there. On the political front, there hasn't been a great deal of continuity, but because of the increasing importance of civil air, the administration, Jonathan, it's the government, has been focusing on Safe Skies, and the U.S. government is also promoting visits by the Department of Transportation and also by the Department of Homeland Security, mind you. In terms of aviation services, there's probably huge potential in that vein. There is foreign competition, and assessing what government needs here is always a tricky business, as Don was referring to. But we would be happy to connect you with the procurement authorities, and the Civair, most of Civair management is based in Lagos, but the ministries are up in Abuja, and we'd be happy to facilitate any possible contacts, and we'd be possible to assess the possibilities for you. Follow-on support is extremely important in the aviation field here.
Thank you.
Our next question comes from Ram Shetty. Your line is open.
Hi, good afternoon. My question is regarding the power sector. We are a small business, but working on high technologies related to power and energy applications and technologies. Would there be any interest for innovative R&D type of probably products and technologies within the countries you mentioned? And if so, what would be the best approach to get connected with some of these organizations who might be working in this area? And thirdly, how do we compete against, for example, Chinese, who are, as you mentioned, probably very low cost, but highly penetrated, organizations within Africa? Thanks.
Well, let me just, thanks for that. And let me just kind of give an update. As Paul and Brian knows, one of the centerpieces of the President's Doing Business in Africa program is Power Africa, which it was an initiative to double electricity capacity, power capacity in 6 countries over a relatively short period of time. That initiative has just been given a big boost. I think our government is tripling down on that program. Now, the team of people associated with that program have just moved from Nairobi, Kenya, down to Pretoria here in South Africa. So I'm actually seeing the Power Africa people almost on a daily basis down here. Much of the investment into the power sector in Sub-Saharan Africa, the private sector investment is coming from South Africa. 60-70% of the private sector investment is coming from here. So they're in the making deals. There was just a deal today in Johannesburg supporting financing and technical support and so forth. So the point is that there's a team of government people, U.S. government people, that are trying to create the environment where public and private sector organizations in Sub-Saharan Africa, and particularly in these 6 countries, can increase their power production. And there's a variety of different ways that's happening. But I'm going to yield to Paul and Brian, because they, and particularly Brian, because you just had the power-focused mission. Do you want to just comment on that?
Yes, so this is Brian again. I'm sorry?
No, that was me. Go ahead, Brian. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's what. So, we were talking about the trade mission that the Commerce Secretary led this past May. Its focus was on power generation. She came to Ghana and Nigeria, as I mentioned. And during her bilateral meeting with the Nigerian Minister of Power, Nebo, N-E-B-O, he asked why American companies had waited so long. And he cited a Chinese competition, but he said that there was a preference for American solutions in the realm of technology and for follow-on support. American companies are known for their follow-on support. So I think the timing is right. The trade mission that created a lot more momentum, and we are helping a lot of American companies, not just the large ones, not really the GEs, but a lot of smaller companies, in terms of finding a potential Nigerian buyers or potential Nigerian or potential Nigerian partners. And the Power Minister urged American companies that come large and small to come to Abuja too. And his staff made itself available to small and medium-sized American firms equally. So let us know if you would like to pursue this. As Paul was saying, we have services that we can provide you, and we can counsel you anytime. That is gratis. We're not required to recover any costs associated with counseling. Thank you.
So let me just very briefly sort of take that question from a Ghanaian angle. There's a theme that sort of bounces around Sub-Saharan Africa and other parts of the world, actually, and it's a sort of forced localization. Ghana has caught on to this probably later than a lot of other places, but in the oil and gas sector here in Ghana, there is local content requirements, and basically it requires foreign invested companies to hand over their companies to local partners. It can be done in a very positive and productive and effective way. Unfortunately, a lot of times, and probably Ghana included, the regulatory structure of these local content requirements are just real blunt instrument, and it's really ineffective. In Ghana here, the local content has been applied to the oil and gas sector. That now they're moving on to another target, and that target is the power sector. There are early proposals now suggesting that Ghana wants to force the power production, the power sector, into local content requirements, meaning that an IPP here would really be forced to hand over the bulk of its investments to a local partner in some form or another. It's not the most effective way to raise the ability and the capacity of the local economy to support a sector like the power sector, but that's what's happening here. You mentioned competing against the Chinese. This is really probably one of the ways that American companies can be most effective. The localization is the way American companies operate around the world. From my time in China, I know that as soon as an expensive expat lands on the ground anywhere in the world, one of their very, very first jobs is to identify a successor, a local successor, and work themselves out of employment and hand over the operations to somebody who knows the culture and ways to get business done locally much better than they do. And they move on to the next market and continue to make the large bucks. It's really nothing new for U.S. companies. What it is new for Chinese companies, though. Chinese companies cannot localize. I have a photo of a friend of mine here, a guy that I know, has an IPP joint venture, a power plant with the Chinese, and he sent me a photo of their signing of I think they were turning on their second turbine or something. The photo is incredible because all of the characters, this is taken here in not too far from Accra in Ghana. The banner they have behind is done entirely in Chinese, and all of the engineers sitting at the table are Chinese guys. There's not a single Ghanaian at the table. When GE finally gets to the stage of turning on their first turbine for the Ghana 1000 project, I guarantee you that nearly everybody sitting at that table is going to have a Ghanaian face, and that's what American companies want. So if you're looking for ways to compete, the best way is to come in with this sort of localization strategy, and that might be doing training programs, doing co-research, and really working locally with government and private sector partners.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Mm-hmm. Mike, I think we're running out of time.
I think so, too. I was just looking at the clock. We've actually got a couple questions that I received through the live meeting program, and I'll be emailing those questions exactly the answers so we can get those squared away. Operator, how many questions do we have left?
You still had 4 questions sitting.
Oh, goodness. Well, I'm sorry we're not going to be able to take, I think, any more questions today. But if you could email me your questions, and I'll send them on to the proper senior commercial officer and get those answered for you right away. But thank you for all the interest and for joining us this afternoon. I think we've heard about a number of exciting opportunities for U.S. exporters to pursue. If you've enjoyed this presentation, we're going to have another one on September 23rd, this time covering East Africa, the countries of Ethiopia and Tanzania. I'll be sending out marketing flyers and registration links for those webinar specifically to all the folks that joined today's call, and hope you can join us then as well. And don't forget about the Atlanta event. It's going to be a great, great event, the Discover Global Markets Sub-Saharan Africa Conference, November 5th and 6th. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to email me about that or give me a call anytime. Thanks to everyone again for joining. Thanks to Don, Paul, and Brian. I really appreciate the great information. And everyone have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Hope to see you all in Atlanta.
That concludes today's conference. Thank you for participating. You may now disconnect.